So good morning. So this week's parsha, we'll start with the parsha, is called Tazria. Tazria means conceive or seed, and it begins by talking about this parsha and next week's parsha go into great detail of the laws of tumah and tahara, ritual purity. The subject we've discussed before, and we even had a class dedicated to the subject, which we spoke in detail about. Thank you. We spoke in detail about tumah and tahara, about the laws of ritual purity, which mostly do not apply today, with the exception of the laws of Nida, which we'll talk about a little bit next week when we speak about the parsha. Most of which, when a person was ritually impure, tameh, they were unable to enter the temple or eat sacrificial meat or eat other holy foods like teruma. When a person would have to go through a purification process, depending on the type of tum'ah, of ritual purity, they would have to go through a purification process, and once they're tahor, they could once again enter the temple, eat sacrificial meats, and eat other holy foods. Again, as I said, it's mostly not observed. These are laws that are mostly not observed today because we don't have a temple standing anymore. So this week's parsha and next week's parsha are going to speak about tumos that come from the human themselves. There's other types of tumah that come from touching. Last week's parsha touching various animals, dead animals. We have tumah from touching a dead human, and so this is another type of tumah, a group of types of tumah that come from the human themselves. And it begins with the tumah of childbirth. If a woman gives birth, she is tameh. If it's a boy, she's tameh for 7 days, a girl for 14 days. The laws of tumah and tahara have no rhyme or reason. They're just, that's the law, that's the way it is. We don't understand why. Then the Torah says that a woman is then, the blood she sees after that is not like her menstrual cycle that would make her tameh, but she remains tahor if for a boy for the next 33 days after that, and for a girl for the next 66 days after that. And after that, she's still not fully pure. She needs to then bring sacrifices after childbirth in order to reach full tahara, full purity. I should just point out that our sages have added, like many mitzvot, have added to the laws of tum'ah, and at least when it comes to the laws that apply today, for a woman who is a nida, or for a woman who gets her menstrual cycle, who is forbidden to have relations while she is tameh. And today, anytime a woman sees blood of any amount and any time, even if it's right after childbirth, is always considered tameh and counts 7 clean days before going to the mikveh. So today, after childbirth, a woman must wait for the bleeding to stop, which can take 4 to 6 weeks, and only then count 7 clean days and go to the mikveh. The parsha then continues to talk about sarat or negaim, which are 2 names for the same skin ailment that the Torah describes in very great detail, where essentially one's skin turns white and the hair turns white, and the Torah gives us many, many different details of different parts of the body where the skin turns white, where the hair turns white or yellow, and it gives us goes into very, very great detail of the tzara. When a person has this skin ailment, they would go to the Kohen. They would not become tameh until the Kohen would declare them as tameh. Kohen meaning a male descendant of Aaron. If the Kohen declares them tameh, then they are tameh. And then when the skin ailment goes away or decreases, they become tahor. They become ritually pure. But they don't become tahor until the Kohen declares them tahor, ritually pure. And the process of then purification is then discussed in next week's parsha. Our sages have pointed out that this video over 1,000 years ago, that this tumah and tahara of these white marks of sarat no longer exists. So firstly, we don't keep the laws of tumah and tahara, but in addition, we don't have any such disease today that exists that matches the description in the Torah, and so therefore we don't worry about it today whatsoever. And our sages in some places say that it was not a natural occurring disease, but somewhat of a miraculous disease that God would give people as punishment for various offenses. The parsha also tells us that not only can tsarat or negaim come on your skin. It can also come on your clothing. It can come of clothing of either wool or linen or leather. It can or sack. Can all those materials can have tsarat on them, and you can and they become tsarat when they have either a reddish or yellowish coloring to them that grows on them. And again, there's different rules as to how they get tsarat. In next week's parsha, we'll learn that the homes in the land of Israel also can get tsarat as well. And so that is the parsha. In short, we'll talk a little bit more about the tsarat and the purification process and some other forms of ritual impurity, such as the nida, the woman who gets a menstrual cycle, God willing, when we talk about next week's parsha, next week.
So, Rabbi, the word Tazria, what does that actually
Tazria means conceive.
To conceive?
Yes, from the word zera, seed. So this week, this coming Tuesday will be the first of the month of Nisan. And Nisan is actually the first month of the year. We have an interesting quirk in Judaism. Although the year starts with Rosh Hashanah, which is in 6 months, the first of the month of Tishrei, or in September time. Usually it's actually going to be October this year, I believe. But the first month, when counting the months, we count from the month of Nisan. And so this is the first month of the year. The first of Nisan was also the day of the inauguration of the Mishkan in the desert, which we spoke about in last week's Parsha. So that happened on the first of Nisan, and therefore it's a very special day. We actually have a custom because by the inauguration of the Mishkan, of the temple in the desert, each day a different tribe was given an opportunity to bring a special sacrifice. So for the first 12 days of Nisan, every day we read about the sacrifice of the tribe that brought a sacrifice on that day. Each day of the first 12 days of the month of Nisan, we read about those sacrifices. So we have, it's called the Nasi, and we have a custom to read it. And then afterwards we say that if I am from, we don't know which tribe we're from anymore, but if we are from this and this tribe that we read about today, then all the energy and all the spiritual power from this particular sacrifice should impact me today. So, and of course, we're getting very close to Passover. Passover begins on the eve of the 15th of Nisan, or the 14th of Nisan is the eve of Passover. So it's just 2 weeks after Tuesday, or really 2 weeks from tomorrow night is going to be the first Seder. So it's important that we start getting ready for Pesach in a number of ways. Just very briefly, the ways that we need to get ready. Firstly, it is we must get rid of all of the chametz in our home. We must make sure there is no chametz. When Pesach comes, we're forbidden from owning any chametz. We're also forbidden, of course, from eating chametz. So we have to clean our kitchens for Passover. I'll give you more details next week of exactly what that entails. I'll just go through very briefly how to prep for Passover. Just some other things. Now, we're not allowed to own chametz in our homes. And so already some time ago, Jews have come up with a workaround, because if you have expensive alcohols, that's really where it started, that you don't want. Alcohol is most alcohol that is grain based is chametz. Whiskeys, beers, vodka, some of them are grain based, and they would all be chametz. So if you don't want to throw them out or give them away, and maybe as hard as you try, you can't drink it all before Passover. Another solution is that you sell it to a non-Jew. And today, now that we have freezers, you can even have all sorts of delicious cakes and pastries in your freezer, and you could do the same thing, sell it to a non-Jew. And so it's widely observed today that we sell chametz to a non-Jew, and therefore the Rebbe would encourage that everybody sell their chametz to a non-Jew before Pesach, because it is very hard for you to, or it may be challenging for you to hire a lawyer to make sure that you have a proper contract. The best thing to do is, and I forgot to print them out beforehand before I come into this class, but I will make sure to do it next week. But the best thing to do is you can either go online on our website, jccmb.com. It's on the homepage, or /sell chametz, I believe, or /Passover has all the Passover things. And All you do is you sign a document making the rabbi your agent to sell your chametz on your behalf, and the rabbi will sell everybody's chametz.
Is it okay to just give it as a donation to people that you know they need it?
If you want to give away all the alcohol, you can, yes.
Well, I don't touch alcohol,
Okay.
but other items.
But yes, you're welcome to give it all away and have nothing left in your house. But for those that are concerned about the pastries in their freezer or the cakes in their freezer, or those that are concerned about other things that they have, what you could do is you put it away, lock it up somewhere, and then you can sell that whole cupboard or room or freezer or whatever it is or alcohol cabinet. You just sell it to a non-Jew, and then you have no problem over Passover. After Passover, the non-Jew will sell it back to you graciously, hopefully, and you will then be able to go back and eat it. Yes?
There's a taker over here. Oh. What about putting your stuff in the garage?
You can put it away anywhere and just sell that area to the non-Jew.
No, I mean you have to sell it.
Yes, you can't own chametz on Passover.
Oh, you can't.
A Jew is not allowed to own chametz on Passover.
So even in your backyard.
Doesn't matter where it is, anywhere in the world.
You can't own
Yes, Mayor.
And even if you sell it, you have to make sure you cover it up.
You should put it away in a separate area. You should ideally put it away in a separate area. Although the Rebbe said even people who, for whatever reason, are not expecting to put away all their chametz, and even those who, God forbid, will eat chametz on Passover, there's still an advantage in selling your chametz because you still don't own it. At least you fulfill the mitzvah of not owning chametz. So another important thing is that on the 2 nights of Passover, Monday night and Tuesday night, on the 14th and 15th, the eve of the 15th and eve of the 16th, or the 22nd and 23rd of April this month, we will be making 2 seders. And so every person should make sure that they are either making a seder at home, have a way to go for the seder, or you are more than welcome to come join us here for our seders here. We're going to have a seder both Monday night and Tuesday night. Join us for one or both. We do have a fee here for the seder to cover the extremely expensive cost of Passover food. But if it's a challenge for you, do not worry. We don't want any Jew to miss out on coming to a seder. Just let us know, and we will. Just let me know. You can email me, call me, and you are more than welcome to join us at the seder regardless. And for those that are making a seder on their own, it's important we'll talk about in 2 weeks when we do the Sunday class. I'll give you more details about the seder. But it's important that if we are making a seder that we have matzah, and not just any matzah. Ideally, one should have the shmura matzah, the handmade matzah. Then the advantage of the handmade matzah is that the matzah that you eat on Passover is a mitzvah, and just like tzitzit that you wear, or tefillin that you wear, or a Torah scroll has to be done for the sake of the mitzvah. The same way the matzah must be baked by a Jew who does it for the sake of the mitzvah. The commercial matzah doesn't do that because it's not baked by Jews, it's just baked by machines. And so therefore, for the Seder itself, one should have shmura matzah. And we have, as the Rebbe encouraged, we give out shmura matzah. So I will have here next week for everyone who doesn't have their own. I encourage you to buy it in larger amounts. We give out 2, 1 for each Seder per person. And we have also asked people in the community to distribute matzah. And I know some of you have already volunteered to distribute matzah within the community. I have the matzah here. If you stick around after the class, I will get you the matzah and a list of where you can distribute it.
What are you going to give us the matzah to give out to neighbors?
I just said right after the class.
Okay.
After the class. Just have to stick around. Because there's a long line, apparently. Get online. Okay, so with that, any questions about the Parsha or Passover? So let's then get straight on to our topic for today. I don't think it's connected to the Parsha or Passover directly, but I guess everything is connected somehow, right? So our topic for today is Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation. Sefer Yetzirah, or the Book of Formation, is one of the earliest non-biblical Jewish books that we have. There's some debate as to exactly when the book was written and who wrote it, but some date it back to our forefather Abraham. If it goes back to our forefather Abraham, hold a second. Let's try that again. Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, is one of the earliest non-biblical Jewish books we have. Some date it all the way back to our forefather Abraham. And if it goes back to our forefather Abraham, then it would be over 3,700 years old. That would make it a very, very old book, older than the rest of our scripture. It was definitely written before the main early work of our oral tradition, which is the book of the Mishnah, which was written about 200 years ago. Which was written around the year 200. Sorry about that, about 1,800 years ago, around the year 200. So it was definitely written before that, possibly much earlier. It's a very cryptic, mystical book that essentially its subject is describing the tools that God used for creation. Therefore, it's called Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation, or the book of creation. It's extremely short. We have a couple different versions. That the shortest version is about 1,300 words, and the longer version is about 2,500 words. Either way, it's pretty short. On its 2-3 pages of regular type. It's not a very large book. We'd call it more today an essay, or it's fairly short, the book itself. It's split into 6 chapters, and the chapters themselves are split into halachot, or sometimes they're called mishnayot, mishnahs, or paragraphs. So it's split into 6 chapters, and the chapters are split into paragraphs. Now, the writing itself is extremely cryptic. You read it, very hard to make any sense of what it's saying. And that's understandably led to many books of commentary being written on it to explain it. So the book, as we said, is really about the tools. It's a very cryptic book about the tools that God used in the process of creation. Now, early sources already describe it as a book. Since it describes the tools God used in the sources of creation, it's a book that can be used to manipulate creation or to create things ourselves. That we humans can use to control creation, do miraculous feats, or to create things. Now, the book itself is cryptic. And if you open the book, there's a lot of cryptic statements there that don't seem to make much sense, and it doesn't really give clear instructions on how to transform or create things. But there must have been some ideas in the book that when a person understands them and understands the deeper meaning behind them and meditates upon them, they could invoke God's power of creation. So the book itself mentions, the book of Sefer Yetzirah, book of formation, mentions at the end, it mentions Abraham and says that Abraham understood all these things. In the last Mishnah, in the last paragraph, it says that Abraham, our forefather, understood all these things and God made a covenant with Abraham. And so based on this, the tradition that goes back to very early commentaries. The earliest commentaries say that Abraham is the original author of this book. And this last Mishnah then kind of describes how Abraham put this book together. Now, clearly, Abraham did not author the work exactly as we have it today, because some of the Hebrew is a little bit of a later Mishnaic Hebrew. Hebrew, like all languages, evolved over time. The biblical Hebrew, the Hebrew language is found in the Torah itself, evolved slightly, even within the biblical period, which covers about 1,000 years, and then it evolves from Moses, and then continues to evolve. And by the Mishnaic era, which is around the year 200, Hebrew has changed significantly. Sefer Yetzirah is more nice. You could tell from a book, right? Just the period it was written from the language. Sefer Yetzirah is more of what we'd call a Second Temple or Mishnaic era Hebrew. and which would imply it was actually compiled a little later. And so commentaries therefore suggest that the ideas originated with Abraham, were passed down orally, like all of our Torah that was passed down from generation to generation, and it was written around the time, or maybe a little bit before the time, the rest of our oral tradition was written down. So when we've done classes before about our oral tradition, it's on the podcast, and we've spoken about how when God first gave Moshe the Torah, he gave it to him. He gave both, the bulk of the Torah was oral, was passed down verbally, and it was passed down from generation to generation and retained in that manner. And it was only began to be written down around the time the Mishnah was written, around the year 200, or some 1600 years after Moses. So the Sefer Yetzirah, presumably the same thing, was passed down orally for many, many, many generations and was only written down at a later time. Some sources attribute the book to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva lived about 2 generations before the writing of the Mishnah, or in the early 100s, in the late 1st century, in the early 100s. He lived just after the destruction of the Second Temple, and so likely, while the tradition of the teachings go back to Abraham, the one who put it together in its current form was Rabbi Akiva, but sometimes we attribute it to perhaps some others from around that period. We know the book of Sefer Yetzirah is very, very old because it's quoted in other very, very early works. The earliest mention of the book is found in the Jerusalem Talmud. The Jerusalem Talmud was an earlier version of the Talmud, written not in Jerusalem but in Tiberias, but it's called the Jerusalem Talmud, around the year 300. Around the year 300 or so, and or maybe a little later, 350. And the Jerusalem Talmud quotes Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah, who was a teacher of Rabbi Akiva and lived before Rabbi Akiva. He was his teacher and lived during the period of the destruction of the Second Temple. And he's quoted as saying that I can take squashes and cucumbers and with Sefer Yetzirah turn them into beautiful trees that can then produce other beautiful trees. Manipulating creation. So Rabbi Yehoshua, with Sefer Yetzirah, with knowing the book, is able to manipulate creation in this way. In a similar manner, the Babylonian Talmud tells us that Rav Chanina and Rav Oshia, who are students of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, lived in the mid-200s. They were able to make a calf with Sefer Yetzirah, and they would regularly make calves that way and slaughter them for Shabbat. So again, manipulating creation using Sefer Yetzirah. We're also told in the Gemara that in Sanhedrin that the sage Rava was able to create a person using Sefer Yetzirah, and the person that he created was unable to speak. He sent the person to his friend, the Rabbi Yetzirah. Rabbi Yetzirah was unimpressed. The guy couldn't even speak. The Rashi at least tells us that it was created using Sefer Yetzirah. So we see that the ability to manipulate creation with Sefer Yetzirah, but just the very concept, the book itself, is mentioned in very, very early sources. And so it was known about in very, very early times. People knew about this book, Sefer Yetzirah. It is, again, as we said, one of the earliest books in our Jewish tradition. Definitely one of the earliest post-non-biblical books that are not part of the Tanakh.
So where is this book actually? I mean, does anybody have copies of it?
Sure, you can go to the store and buy one, or you can go online, Google it.
Really?
Sure, it's very easy to get the copies of Sefer Yetzirah. Where do you get it today? Well, let me talk about commentaries. But the original is in Hebrew, but there are, of course, translations into many, many, many different languages, including many translations into English. And I think there's a wiki text that you could get a translation of it And there's other websites, Sefer and others that have it. As a closed cryptic book, though, many commentaries were written on the book from very early times because the book itself makes no sense when you read it. It says things that it just doesn't, it's gibberish. It doesn't make any sense if you were to read it, right? If you were to read it at face value. Clearly, it was meant as a cryptic book that tells you these very, very deep concepts that you need to have a background, you need to have context in order to be able to properly understand. So early on in our, at least more, period when people were already writing commentaries on various books, we already start seeing commentaries on Sefer Yetzirah. The first commentary that we have today was written by Rav Sadia Gaon, who lived in the 10th century. He was one of the Gaonim. We did a class a few weeks ago about the Gaonim. He lived in Babylon. Very unique figure. So he wrote a commentary on Sefer Yetzirah. But even within decades of Rav Sadia Gaon, there are a number of other people from that era already that wrote commentaries on Sefer Yetzirah. And following him, dozens, if not hundreds of Jewish scholars, philosophers, mystics over the past 1,000 years wrote commentaries attempting to explain the book. So the book, I said, is very, very short. It's only 2-3 pages, the whole book. It's a very, very short book. However, the commentaries that are explaining the book, because it's so cryptic, have added a huge amount to the book. So today you can buy these thick books called Sefer Yetzirah, but they're 99% commentary, right? And 1% text, right? The text is 3 pages. If you got a 300-page book, right, it's 99% commentary. So there are books of Sefer Yetzirah. You could get the original text, but again, with the original text doesn't have much value if you don't understand what it's talking about and you don't properly understand the background and understand exactly what it's about.
If you buy the book and you read all the commentaries, does it start to make sense?
It will make sense, but I thought you were going to ask, do you know how to then create golems or cows? I don't believe so. But yes, it will start to make sense, although it is Kabbalah. We'll soon talk about, we'll soon talk a little bit about it. So while the Torah itself, along with the halachic midrashic works like the Talmud, Midrashim, was widely studied by all Jews. There were great Torah centers, yeshivot that we've spoken about in various classes. We did a class on the yeshiva where Torah was taught. And Jews were always in touch with the great yeshivot. Their rabbis were graduates of the great yeshivot. They often traveled to the great yeshivot, supported them, wrote letters to them. And the schools themselves were often in touch with each other, and various scholars were in touch with each other. And as a result, although there are various disagreements in Jewish law, in Jewish tradition, in variations, and that have crept up over the years, and even variations in text. However, in most things there tends to be some sort of consensus because everyone is working with each other. Mystical teachings of the Torah, though, were generally studied secretly in very small groups. These groups were often not in close contact with each other. So because the book of Sefer Yetzirah is so old, and it was studied in small secret groups, we have a number of early versions of the book that are quite different from each other. We have a number of versions, and the difference is quite significant. Those versions are usually split into what we call Hakatzar, the short version of Sefer Yetzirah, and Ha'aruch, the long version of Sefer Yetzirah. The long version is about double the size of the short version. So it's quite a bit longer. Many commentaries feel that the long version, actually what happened was people wrote commentaries on the side of the text, and then as a result, some of those commentaries then crept into the text itself. Remember, this is before printing. This is when you would have to copy a book by hand. So the copyists copied the commentaries into the text of the book itself without differentiating, and as a result, the book grew and became much longer. We also have Rav Sadia Gaon's commentary. The first commentary that we have actually appears to be a different version than either of those two versions, the long and short version, and so it's what we call Rav Sadia Gaon's version. with multiple different versions, and each version itself has multiple different sub-versions with slight variations. The Arizal, perhaps the greatest Kabbalist of all times, we once did a class about him, Rav Yitzchak Luria, who lived in the 16th century in Tzfat. He edited Sefer Yetzirah, and so his own version of what he felt was the most accurate version according to balance it with other works of Kabbalah, the Zohar and Sefer HaBahir and other important works. So he edited it, and that became known as the Arizal version, although the Gra, the Vilna Gaon, then further refined it, and it's usually referred today as the Gra version, the version of the Vilna Gaon. Gra is the Gaon, Rabbeinu Eliyahu. It's an acronym for the GRA. It's an acronym for Rav Eliyahu, the Gaon of Vilna, who was another great sage who lived in the 18th century, maybe deserves a class dedicated to him as well. You could add Rav Sadia Gaon and the Gaon of Vilna. So it's probably the earliest book of Kabbalah, the earliest book of mystical teachings. Sefer Yetzirah has the same challenge we face when studying Kabbalah in general. It's explaining things that are beyond our experience. It's explaining God, explaining spirituality, explaining souls, explaining spiritual things beyond our experience, beyond our understanding. And so the way it explains these things is by giving examples and metaphors from our experience, but we have to understand that it is not meant to be taken literally. And this is part of the challenge in general with studying mysticism, Kabbalah, that sometimes we struggle with it because it's dealing with things that are very hard to understand, very hard to relate to, and we have to be careful not to take the metaphors at face value, because then you end up thinking of God and spiritual things in materialistic forms, and that would be incorrect. That's wrong. So you have to be very careful to understand it only in its metaphorical sense. And so it's true in trying to understand the cryptic words of Sefer Yetzirah. Many of the various things that are mentioned are physical things, but it's not literally those physical things. It rather is metaphors for spirituality, and we have to have an understanding of exactly what the metaphor means. So the key premise of the book of Sefer Yetzirah is that God created our world with 32 tools that include the 10 Sefirot and 22 Hebrew letters. And I think we can best think of this today like a programmer who creates software. So if you open your phone and you open an app that tells you where to go, your GPS, your perhaps Google Maps or Waze, or maybe you open your email and you're responding to email, or maybe you open a game if you're one of those gaming people that like to play on your phone, right? Or your computer screen, or you watch a movie, right? All of those things, what you're doing is you're watching things on a screen or manipulating the screen to do different things, maybe to do your banking, right? Maybe to invest in stocks. Hopefully you'll make some money. But all that, what you're just doing is you're looking at a screen with a bunch of pixels. And that's a sensitive screen that's sensitive to touch. You could touch various things, and you're just looking at the pixels moving. Now, how does all that work? It all works on code. It's all built on code. And so there are programmers who program the code of your phone that is feeding to your phone, the code that your phone has downloaded in the app. And essentially, your bank on the phone, it might be where all your money is stored and it tells you how much is in your bank account, but it's really just a program, right? It's just a software. And the same is also your Waze is telling you where to go, but it's really just software, right? Or the game that you're playing, or the movie you're watching, that's all it is. It's software that's instructing the pixels how to move on the screen. The software has meaning to you because those numbers in your bank account are actually numbers that you could then use and spend on. Again, on another app, you'll go on your Amazon app or whatever other apps you have for spending, and you can spend using your credit card numbers, which are that it's going to draw out of your bank account, all running on software, right? That software is basically just code. While you're living life, our lives are really just running on code. What happens if someone changes the code? Then the app crashes, right? If someone is able to hack into one of these apps, your phone crashes or the app crashes, and you may end up discovering a different amount of money in your bank account than you expected to be because someone hacked your bank account, or someone hacked your Amazon account, or someone hacked your Waze, whatever it may be, right? Today, in the war, in areas where there are wars, like in Ukraine or in Israel, people have a problem. You go onto Google Maps, and it tells you that you're in a different country, right? Because they hacked, right? They hacked the GPS, and now it's telling you something totally different. So it's all running on programming. Now, these programs are all written with various codes, right? They use various codes, C++ and JavaScript, and they're using all these different HTML. They're using these various different codes to be able to program these various different apps, and there's a dozen of them, or 24, I don't know how many there are now. Lots and lots of different codes that tell the apps exactly how they're supposed to be working on your phone. All of these codes are all written on what we call the byte system. The byte system is a system that has 256 characters made up of the 8 plus or minus switches that are inside on the that are inside your phone, essentially, that are then that are on the hardware, in the hardware of your phone, and that then allows each character that has kind of a particular, in a particular setting, or a particular plus and minus, or 0 and 1 is how they actually term it, and then the program is then written with those different characters. Those characters are used to write the program, and then are used to write, the programming language. And then once you have programming language and you have an operating system that understands the programming language, then you could build an app with programming language, and then the app will run on that particular program. Did I explain it right? More or less? Okay. Thank you to all those software developers sitting here. So,
Computer operation one.
in a similar way, God created our world. And our world is all just code, just like the screen that you're looking at, and the bank account that you're looking at, and the maps you're looking at, and the movie you're watching. It's just pixels moving on a screen generated by code in the hardware of your phone or of your laptop. It's just software, and it can be manipulated by manipulating the software. Our world also, all that you see in front of you, all matter is just pixels on a screen. And underneath it is underlying godly code that is generating each thing by the master programmer that programs each and everything. So that code is written with a programming language. That programming language is based on basic characters, basic building blocks. The basic building blocks of creation are the 10 Sefirot and 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. That is essentially the basic characters with which the programming language is written, with which eventually, through a system of multiple kind of programming languages built one on top of the other, you end up getting your world exactly as it looks around you. So Sefer Yetzirah is explaining not the programming language, but the cryptic characters that are built, that the programming language is built on. And it's sharing this basic code that God used to create. So that's what Sefer Yetzirah is about in short. Now, if you open it, it's very cryptic. It's hard to understand exactly what it's saying. But I'll give you just a quick overview of what it talks about. It's a very short book, so we could cover an overview of pretty much the entire book. The first chapter begins by saying, God created the world with 32 paths of wisdom. And he created it in 3 modes: Sefer, Safar, and Sipur. Safar, Sefer, and Sipur. Number, book, and story. So there's some various variations in the order. And the chapter then begins to proceeds to explain the 10 Sefirot in this first chapter, and then the following chapters continue to explain the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, the alphabet. Some commentaries explain that the 10 Sefirot and the 22 letters are the 32 paths of wisdom. Others say otherwise. They point to other 32 paths of wisdom. But again, there's many, many different commentaries and many, many, many different ways to understand every single line and every single phrase in this book. So some commentaries at least explain that the number, book, and story refer to the Sefirot, the number. The book is the letters, and the story is the letters' permutations, or the way the letters interact with other letters. So chapter 1 then continues to describe the 10 Sefirot. Essentially every Mishnah, every paragraph beginning with the words Eses Sefirot Belima, 10 Sefirot without what? Those are the words, Belima, 10 Sefirot without what? It explains it in 12 subsequent Mishnahs, but it doesn't anywhere actually list the 10 Sefirot. It describes them in multiple different ways, but it does not actually list what they are. The listing of the 10 Sefirot can be found in a number of other places, such as the Zohar and many, many other works of Kabbalah. But although it speaks about the 10 Sefirot at length in this book, length is relative for the book, but it does speak about the Sefirot, it doesn't actually list them. Chapter 2 through 5 focuses then on the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And it splits them into 3 groups. The first is the letters Aleph, Mem, and Shin. And they are called the mother letters.
Oh,
Then mother letters. Then there are 7 letters, Bet, Gimel, Daled, Kaf, Pei, Resh, and Taf. And they are called the double letters. And then there are 12 letters, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yud, Lamed, Nun, Samach, Ayin, Tzadik, and Kuf, and they are called Pshutot, or the simple letters. So they're split into 3, 7, and 12, 3 different groups, Imot, mothers, Kfulot, doubles, and Pshutot, simple. The first chapter then continues to explain the letters in various different ways. It mentions a number of things about the letters, again, each one cryptic. It does mention that there are 5 parts of the mouth that we use to generate sounds. Some sounds come from the throat, some sounds come from the palate, some sounds come from the tongue, some sounds come from the teeth, and some sounds come from the lips. And it divides the 22 Hebrew alphabet based on where the sounds come from. It also mentions, and this is one of the most famous things from Sefer Yetzirah, that there are 231 gates of permutations. In other words, 231 she'arim, gates, ways that you can combine the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet could be combined in 231 different ways. The simple arithmetic to get to 231 is you do 22 times 21 divided by 2, and you get to 231. Right? And that 22 times 21, because it could be with 21 other letters, and then divided by 2, because you can have it both ways, right? Aleph bet and bet aleph. So you end up with 231 possible letter combinations for the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Yes, Mayor?
The pronunciation, is the Sephardi pronunciation where
That's an excellent question. Is of the Hey Motzaot Hapeh, the 5 ways that the mouth sounds, is it Sephardi or Ashkenazi? That's an excellent question. And the Chet and the Ayin are both considered sounds from the throat. Now, the Chaf that says Ch comes from the palate, right? The Het, as Eli could do it, the Het and the Ayin come from the throat. So they are clearly doing it the Sephardic way. Okay, but excellent point. Thank you. Chapter 3 focuses on the 3 mother letters, or the Shalosh Imot, Aleph, Mem, Shin. It compares them to fire, water, and air, among other things. Esh, Mayim, Ruach. Chapter 4 focuses on the 7 double letters, Bet, or Kfulot, Bet, Gimel, Daled, Chaf, Pei, Resh, and Taf. It makes the point towards the end of the chapter that 2 letters can make 2 possible combinations if you count also backwards, right? 1, 2, 2, 1, or A, B, B, A. 3 letters can make 6 possible combinations. 4 letters can make 24 possible combinations. 5 letters can make 120 possible combinations. And then it says, Mikan ve'elech tzevach. From here, go figure it out the rest yourself. It's also a simple arithmetic. The combination of 2 letters is 1 times 2. Combinations of 3 letters would be 1 times 2 times 3. Combinations of 4 letters would be, which is 6. Combination of 4 letters would be 1 times 2 times 3 times 4, which is 24. Combination of 5 letters would be 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5, which is 120. And you can in that way figure out any combination of any number of letters. Chapter 5 then addresses the remaining 12 letters, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yud, Lamed, Nun, Samach, Ayin, Tzadik, and Kuf, and it points it out, it makes a number of points about them, but one thing that it points out is that they correspond to the 12 angles on a cube. So if you look at a Yud Bet, Gvole Alachson, if you look at a cube, you will see that a cube has 12 angles on it, or 12 corners. Not angles, sorry, it's the wrong word. 12 corners, 12 places where 2 sides meet on a cube. So then chapter 6 continues to speak about the letters. It mentions there that everything that God created, Zeh L'umat Zeh, is one opposite the other. Tov L'umat Ra, good opposite bad. Ra L'umat Tov, bad opposite good. So good and bad match each other. Whatever you have good, you have an equal bad. Whatever you have bad, you have an equal good. And it concludes with that final mission that I mentioned about how Abraham understood all this, and then God made a covenant with him. Any questions?
I'm more confused than before.
No, it sounds like very deep software language, really.
So today we don't have. Today we can. I gave you a very, very brief overview. As I said, there are many commentaries that you can read. Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, who was a prolific writer, died at a very young age, some 50 years ago, but was a prolific writer and wrote many great books. Wrote a translation and commentary in English on Sefer Yetzirah. It's probably the best one out there in English still today, 50 years after it was printed. And if you really want to study it, that's the one I recommend you try. If you really want to study Sefer Yetzirah, it itself is not easy to understand or read. And as I said, there is many commentaries written on it, many translations into English as well. Again, there are many versions of the Hebrew too, but it's definitely something that a person can study. Yes, Mayor?
Is there any attempt by any of them to make sense of how one can use the basic information to create things?
How you would create with it? Not that I know of. I don't know of any commentary who wrote how you could use it to create things with it. So I don't know. So today we of course don't have that knowledge to be able to manipulate creation, but we can study books like Sefer Yetzirah or Kabbalah in general, which speaks about creation and God's relationship with creation and the process used in creation. We've done a number of classes where we've covered Seder Hishtalshalut. We did a course last year on it. Seder Hishtalshalut is the Kabbalistic term for the system or the process God used for creation. We did a course about a year ago where we discussed it. We discussed Seder Hishtalshalut in great detail. For those who are in our Tuesday night Kabbalah group that meets on Tuesday nights, we've been studying Seder Hishtalshalut already for some time. And for those who would like to join our ongoing group that will be restarting in May, you're welcome to do so. Just let me know if you'd like to join. It is complex and deep, but if you're ready for a challenge, then I definitely invite you to join. But studying Kabbalah and studying the process of creation helps us better understand creation. It helps us better understand how our world works, and it helps us, most importantly, develop a better relationship with God. And one simple example of the power of books like Sefer Yetzirah or Kabbalah in general is the concept that I mentioned earlier, the very premise of Sefer Yetzirah, that we are all built on code that is programmed by the master programmer who wrote all the software and writes all the software for creation and keeps creation in existence constantly, just like the software developers that must be kind of constantly keeping up the software for any system to run. So God does the same and keeps our world functioning. But just understanding that and appreciating that gives us a whole different perspective on the world around us, because people get very excited about certain things in this world. Some things people want very, very much. I need to buy that kind of car, or I need to visit this kind of place. I need to see this particular thing, or I need to buy that item of clothing. They need certain things, or they want recognition for certain things, or they want to do certain things. And when you think about it, it's really all just software. It's really just all God's creation. It's not really all that important. All those things, and then things get us upset when things don't go the way we'd like them to go, or when people don't do what we'd like them to do, and it gets us really upset. Someone just rear-ended me. Well, that's pretty upsetting, but it's not that big a deal. It's all just God's software anyway, right? Not that big a deal. Doesn't matter all that much. And you got to remember, if it's all built by the master programmer has a plan for his program. And rather than focusing on all the minor things, we should better focus on what is the master programmer's plan for his program. And he gave us his handbook and gave us the plan. And that's, of course, the Torah that gives us instructions as to how we should live our life. So we have the instructions. So rather than worrying about the little stuff, the unimportant stuff, the program, focus on the plan of the programmer and what the programmer would like us to do. And that is what truly matters in life. That is truly important. That's just one very important example of how studying Sefer Yetzirah, Kabbalah, Chassidus, which is a more relatable form of understanding Kabbalah and the system of creation. By studying these things, we are able to better understand our relationship with God, and it can change our lives and change us and make us different and better people, focusing on what we should be focusing rather than the foolish things that some people focus on. Hopefully we will all learn to do that.
Yishar koach. That's beautiful.
But thank you again, Annette and Kenny and Louise for sponsoring our breakfast this morning. And we definitely can appreciate further sponsors. And we will see you all back next week. For those that want to stick around, I have boxes of matzah and we'll get you your roots if you stick around for a few moments. Louis, is there a particular week?
You said you only have next week covered, so
Week
are we
after?
gonna have it